Hey everybody, it's episode 3 of the Back to School mini-series for UIO, the podcast for teen girls. Hugs to everyone, even if they are virtual, and thank you for joining UIO, the podcast for teen girls. It is for you and about you inside out. I am Sonja Lewis, your host. Today, we're talking about racial injustice and how to actually talk about race, particularly during an intense time. Tough subject, so why now? Simply put, we live in a racially fueled environment, and it didn't just happen with the brutal killing of 46-year-old George Floyd by a police officer in Minnesota, USA. Sadly, many racially unjust tragedies have happened in various countries. It was such a tragedy that started the Black Lives Matter movement in 2013 in the US. It was a response to the acquittal of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. You might recall that Zimmerman shot and killed the 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in a Sanford, Florida neighborhood in which the teen was visiting alongside his father. Trayvon was walking alone from a nearby convenience store. There were no recordings other than the 911 call and of Zimmerman giving his statement to the police. No account of what happened other than Zimmerman's account. This indeed got press coverage, as did other race-related tragedies, such as the cases of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. But in the May 2020 case of George Floyd, 17-year-old Darnella Frazier filmed it live. It was this video that led to worldwide exposure of the brutal crime, showcasing this cruel act of racial injustice. This story has gripped the world's attention, and rightly so. But here's the thing. Black people are faced with covert and some overt racial injustice daily. Racism is an everyday occurrence and has been mainstreamed into workplaces, schools, entertainment, sports, lives, any and everywhere, and remains firmly ensconced often until it explodes into an ugly, extreme tragedy such as what happened to George Floyd. It is really awful that it has come to this. Nonetheless, here we are asking many questions of our authorities, ourselves. How did this happen? What can we do to effect change for justice? Change for equality? What does it all mean? For many, that's where Black Lives Matter comes in. Though I'm not directly involved in the movement, I fully support it and think it is so important not to be distracted by the messages that aim to hijack this campaign, distort it as radical, combative, and so on, and messages that either ignore the underlying problem of racial injustice or dismisses it with insensible messages such as all lives matter, or misrepresents it with frenzied, aimless behavior. The key is to focus on the matter of racism, of racial injustice, and advocate for justice for change. That is what we need to talk about. And that is what I want to do today. Let's talk. Welcome to UIO's podcast on how to talk about race. I'm really excited to use this platform to share some of my personal experiences in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, and to get to the heart of how to talk about race. Most of us have had it drummed into us that race, along with religion and politics and a few other subjects, are no-go areas. But this thinking no longer serves us. Talking is necessary for change. But we have to find a way to do this constructively, because such conversations are rarely just about the topic that meets the eye, but such conversations are about our deeply rooted views, our deep emotions, the way we see the world, the way we experience the world, and when someone else sees it differently, we feel attacked and can get defensive at the very least. And the lines between fact and fiction, right and wrong, moral and immoral become blurred. So let's talk. Why talk? Let's go back to my childhood, say 1970, 71, when I was 9 years old. The schools in the district that I was attending integrated, though apparently Georgia had integrated schools 11 years or so before we were born. That's me and my peers. And the law for all states to do so came even earlier. Anyhow, my white peers and I, up until that year, had schooled separately. And just like that, we were thrown into the same school in the fourth grade without much conversation. This monument event likely changed the trajectory of my life. For the first 3 years of schooling, I was a confident straight A student. And suddenly, in the fourth year of school, I got a bad grade. How could this be? Well, a system that thought my white peers were brighter than me appeared validated. Ouch. It was assumed that somehow I had become a lesser student. Perhaps even I believed it. And though perhaps subconsciously bought into believing that I was not good at math, that was the subject at hand. Then later it was standardized testing and so on. What I would learn later, of course, was that the schooling experience, including the tests, was not designed for me. My life experiences at that point. Fortunately, I had supportive parents and other allies, and here I am, though not a straight A student anymore. Still, my white peers and I remained unequal throughout my school career. As children, we stuck with our own kind, and though we fraternized, even as teenagers, we remained silent on the matter and accepted our twisted norm. The very system that brought us together worked insidiously to keep us apart and in the places assigned to us. No one talked about it. So we see that at the very least, not talking about race misinforms and leads to distorting values and reshaping norms unhealthily. But remember this, talk is different to debating whether racial injustice is right or wrong. It is clear-cut wrong, end of story. Thus, I would not advise getting into debates with people who perpetuate hate, oppression, and so on. Talking about race is about fundamental change, so we must talk. Take a minute and listen to what rising tennis star Coco Gauff has to say about using your voice.
My name is Coco, and who just spoke was my grandma. And I think it's sad that I'm here protesting the same thing that she did 50 plus years ago. So I'm here to tell you guys this, that we must first love each other no matter what. We must have the tough conversations with my friends. I've been spending all week having tough conversations trying to educate my non-Black friends on how they can help the movement. Second, we need to take action. And yes, we're all out here protesting, and I'm not of age to vote, but it's in your hands to vote for my future, for my brother's future, and for your future. So that's one way to make change. Third, you need to use your voice. No matter how big or small your platform is, you need to use your voice. I saw a Dr. King quote that said, "The silence of the good people is worse than the brutality of the bad people." So you need to not be silent, because if you are choosing silence, you are choosing the side of the oppressor. So I heard many things this past week, and one of the things I heard is, well, it's not my problem. So this is what I have to tell you this. If you listen to Black music, if you like Black culture, if you have Black friends, then this is your fight too. It's not your job, it's not your duty to open your mouth to say, Lil Uzi Vert's my favorite artist, but I don't care what happened to George Floyd. Now how does that make sense? So I demand change now. And it's sad that it takes another Black man's life to be lost for all of this to happen, but we have to understand that this has been going on for years. This is not just about George Floyd. This is about Trayvon Martin. This is about Eric Garner. This is about Breonna Taylor. This is about stuff that's been happening. I was 8 years old when Trayvon Martin was killed. So why am I here at 16 still demanding change? And it breaks my heart. Because I'm fighting for the future for my brothers. I'm fighting for the future for my future kids. I'm fighting for the future for my future grandchildren.
Let's look at how do we talk. Everyone wants to know, and though there are no easy solutions to diplomacy, if you will, I have come to rely on 3 main points when talking about race and several secondary points. Number one, know your racial history. Educate yourself first and then others. While the momentous events of Black history in the U.S., slavery to abolition to the civil rights movement to now, are indelibly sketched in my mind, I did a bit of review and looking beyond what I was taught in school. Admittedly, as a journalist, I have always researched history, but I've come to understand over the years the importance of knowing the true history of where I live, if I can find it. Books, articles, even movies based on true stories are great, but human beings are even better at remembering things and putting themselves and their ancestors and so on into the context of history. If you have elderly relatives, talk to them. They can share their experiences and also might have access to the experiences of their ancestors as well. Here in the UK, my paper for my master's degree in international journalism had to do with Black in the UK and Black in the US. I gained info from the few books I could get my hands on and articles, but I also spoke to people who traveled to the UK on the Windrush and people involved in the right for racial equality, and learned that Black history in the UK is wide ranging. Also, I sat down and talked with my father in law, who was white English and served in World War II. And we'll talk a little bit more about talking to your white peers. Having re educated myself, I've learned more about the African diaspora throughout the world. And that's really good news for me. You see, being educated about the racial history of your country will likely help to understand racism, its origins, and the link between history and the present. There continues to be a debate about what racism is and what it is not, and who can be racist and who cannot, and what is prejudice, and so on. Educate yourself and make your own decisions. Of course, there is more work to do before you can get to a conversation, but if you understand the facts, it's a great start. You can then be instrumental in educating others, even if subtly. For example, a teenage environmentalist guest on UIO talks about educating her parents about the environment. And I remember my stepdaughter as a teenager educating us about the inappropriate dealings of a major corporation. Remember, no matter how small your platform is, use it to speak out and to educate others. Let's have a listen to what George Floyd's brother Terrence says about educating yourself and not being distracted away from things that really matter.
I understand y'all upset, but like it was already said, I doubt y'all half as upset as I am. So if I'm not over here wilding out, if I'm not over here blowing up stuff, if I'm not over here messing up my community, then what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing, because that's not gonna bring my brother back at all. It may feel good for the moment, but when it comes down, you're gonna wonder what you did. My family is a peaceful family. My family is God-fearing. Yeah, we upset, but we're not gonna take it. We're not gonna be repetitious. In every case of police brutality, the same thing has been happening. Y'all protest, y'all destroy stuff, and they don't move. You know why they don't move? Because it's not their stuff, it's our stuff. So they want us to destroy our stuff. They're not gonna move. So let's do this another way. Let's do this another way. Let's stop thinking that our voice don't matter. And vote. Not just vote for the president, vote for the preliminaries, vote for everybody. Educate yourself. Don't wait for somebody else to tell you who's who. Educate yourself and know who you're voting for. What's his name?
George Floyd!
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 George!
Floyd!
George!
Floyd!
George!
Floyd!
George!
Floyd!
Let's move to point 2. Know your link, your reality. Know your family lineage. Know what it cost them. Often, not knowing helps some people to feel free of the past. If you ask me, not knowing does just the opposite. It keeps people tied to a past that distorts morality. As I went through my teenage and young adult years, I remember what I knew about my family, what experiences my parents might have had being born in the 30s and their parents, and so on. Listen to this clip from the 2016 movie Hidden Figures, based on the lives of three Black women mathematicians who play a pivotal role in astronaut John Glenn's launch into orbit in 1962. This is Taraji P. Henson playing the role of young Katherine G. Johnson.
Where the hell have you been? Everywhere I look, you're not where I need you to be. It's not my imagination. Now, where the hell do you go every day?
To the bathroom, sir.
To the bathroom. To the damn bathroom. For 40 minutes a day? What are you doing there?
We're T-minus 0 here. I put a lot of faith in you.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. And I can't use one of the handy bikes. Picture that, Mr. Harrison. My uniform, skirt below my knees, my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. Lord knows you don't pay colors enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog, day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch. So, excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day.
This clip really helped me to put into perspective what life must have been like for my parents during that time, who were 28 and 29, and I was actually born in 1962. Though there has been much progress since the late 50s, early 60s, we continue to see the system of racism shape lives. In high school, though the Jim Crow laws were gone, we had separate proms, for example. In college university, we had white and Black sororities, again, for example. We even have some separate universities in the United States. Our historically Black colleges and university, which I do think certainly were necessary and continue to be necessary. But that's another story. Maybe I'll talk about that in another podcast. While in a lecture at university, I remember distinctly talking about the Old South and being one of two Black people in the room. And our white peers longed to return to the past. This was as jarring to my ears as someone calling me out of my name, but because it was a norm to them to speak so freely, because they had not been directly involved in slavery, our upset was dismissed as being overly sensitive. It was and is systematic racism to expect someone whose ancestors were oppressed by a system to long to go back to it. Once during a work trip in my 20s, some colleagues and I visited a plantation house. Not sure what state, I don't remember. And I don't remember much about the huge house, but I do remember the slave quarters and everything about the silence between us, me and my peers, unable to talk about a dark past because so much of it lingered in the present, not necessarily between us, but in the world. The key is to put your life into the context of history and racism, and then you will understand better sometimes why talking about race is so difficult. Though you won't have my experiences, you will have the experiences of your family, whether you're white, Black, or mixed race, or another race altogether. And you might have some of your own experiences as well. Understanding helps to face facts, deal with guilt, shame, whatever might taint your conversations. Let's look at number 3. Understand the big picture. A fight cannot be won without allies. Let's face it. Throughout history, people have made great inroads into causes and have fought and won physical and symbolic battles with allies. A little story about a time in my life when having allies really mattered. In my first job as a reporter, I learned that I was making about $9,000 less than any other journalist at the paper. I likely made what the custodians made. The person closest to me in experience was a white female, a friend who actually introduced me to the paper. She had 1 year more experience than me. This was a painful, shameful story for me to talk about for years. As I was only the third Black reporter at the paper, at first the message was loud and clear that it should have been a privilege for me, even if I was being mistreated. Later, of course, I realized this was distorted thinking. In short, I got an ally, my friend, and somewhere along the way went to our editor, an older white female, well ensconced in the old South. She fought for me, but she did lose the fight. And that was the end of the story from her perspective. I didn't agree. So I took the matter to the head of the family, who happened to be in a prominent position in the community. He was the mayor, but he was also publisher of the newspaper. Yes, this gets a little interesting. Within weeks of my campaign, the mayor actually died, and his son, editor-in-chief of the newspaper, hauled me into his office and had a little chinwag, a very tough one. After coining me a troublemaker, I had to leave. In those days, I didn't understand the big picture that white privilege often upholds racism from a position of power and fear, even sometimes elusively. If I had understood, I might have gone about my fight in a different way. Still, in my immaturity, seeking allies was the right thing to do. This using my voice restored resilience in me, belief in myself, and led to my path to New York City. Had I stayed at the paper or landed the first job that I applied for, which was also local, I might not have had the opportunities to broaden my horizons. In any case, the point is oppression is a human problem, not the problem of the oppressed. We have seen this element work time and again throughout history on a larger scale. It is working now with Black Lives Matter, which is why we must not be distracted from the big picture. Allies might not have your experience, but they often have a moral concern and the motivation to make the world a better place. One last note on this. Remember that fear of the tables turning perhaps, fear of losing the privilege, can sometimes stand between right and wrong, moral and immoral. Listen to this clip from George Floyd's brother, Philanese, on the importance of togetherness for change.
George always made sacrifices for our family, and he made sacrifices for complete strangers. He gave the little that he had to help others. He was our gentle giant. I was reminded of that when I watched the video of his murder. He called all the officers sir. He was mild-mannered. He didn't fight back. He listened to all the officers. The man who took his life, who suffocated him for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he still called them sir as he begged for his life. I can't tell you the kind of pain you feel when you watch something like that. When you watch your big brother, who you looked up to your whole entire life, die begging for his mom, I'm tired. I'm tired of pain. Pain you feel when you watch something like that. When you watch your big brother, who you looked up to for your whole life, die begging for his mom, I'm here to ask you to make it stop. Stop the pain. Stop us from being tired. George called for help and he was ignored. Please listen to the call I'm making to you now, to the calls of our family and the calls ringing out the streets across the world. People of all backgrounds, genders, and races have come together to demand change. Honor them, honor George, and make the necessary changes that make law enforcement the solution and not the problem. Hold them accountable when they do something wrong. Teach them what it means to treat people with empathy and respect. Teach them what necessary force is. Teach them that deadly force should be used rarely and only when life is at risk. George wasn't hurting anyone that day. He didn't deserve to die over $20. I'm asking you, is that what a black man is worth? $20?
Now to that conversation. With your education, understanding of context, perspective, and the big picture in tow, consider these points. Number 1, know what the goal of your conversation is. If you are burning to talk about George Floyd's injustice with someone of a different ethnicity, ask yourself why. What is the purpose? Be clear about what you want from the conversation and whether it is realistic or not. But remember, racism is a huge problem, not one that you and your friend, don't approach foes, are going to solve, but we can all do something to affect positive change. Remember, no matter how small it is, use your platform. Number 2, respect what your friend, family member, associate, classmate has to say. Listen as best as you can without judgment. We all have emotional views of how we see things. They might have different views, but different doesn't always mean bad intent. Be mindful of your language, whatever race you are and however you feel. Assume that people are not being intentionally hurtful. People bring different layers and different experiences to the table. At best, you can empathize with each other, and at worst, you can agree to disagree. For example, if someone says, all lives matter, it might cut through you sharply, but listen as best as you can. No planning your response, and then respond. A response might be, that is so true, and that is why this campaign is so important. With the facts staring us in the face, it feels like we need reminding that Black lives matter. Let's look at number 3. Have boundaries for conversations about race. If you don't know the person or realize that their goal is malicious, opt out. And also, don't feel that you have to have a conversation even if you love and respect the person. You don't. Another boundary might be to leave a conversation that is going nowhere. Number 4, consider the context. There is a time and a place for all conversations, no matter how big or small. It's critical that we always consider the context before we engage with a difficult conversation. For example, it would not be appropriate to try to talk about race to a Black peer in the company of all white peers, or a public place like in the classroom or on the bus or tube. Number 5, practice honesty. This can apply in so many ways, which is why honesty is such an integral part of the human condition. If we can be truly honest with ourselves and the people around us, that can only benefit the situation at hand. Loads to work with here, but it doesn't have to be all hard work. Remember to check out movies based on true stories. A couple of examples are A United Kingdom and Hidden Figures. I watched both recently and found them entertaining and also educating. Lots of great books on the market, fact and fiction. 2 of my favorite based on UK Black history are Small Island, which is fiction, which has been turned into a musical, and Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Well, that's it. We've come to the end of our podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure sharing my experiences with you on this important topic. And I just want to say thank you so much to Coco Gauff, Terrence Floyd, and Philonise Floyd for speaking out on this very, very important subject. And thank each and every one of you for the great conversations that you've already been having and the ones to come in the future. Thank you. That is a wrap for UIO on how to talk about race now. Thank you, girls, for listening, and thank you, God, for the opportunity to do the show. Today, I want to pray for race relations in both the US and the UK, that more people will educate themselves, put race into the context of their own experience, and consider the big picture, and that the fight for racial equality and justice will continue to gain momentum. I ask these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Tune in next week for the final episode of UIO in this series. We'll be talking to author and grief specialist Christy Huckstead about grief. Meanwhile, hit me up on Twitter at Sonja Lewis, Instagram at Sonja D. Lewis, Facebook, sonjalewis.com/UIO-podcast. Tell me what you want to hear about and keep sending those questions on any of the episodes. Take care of you inside out, and remember, it is UIO.